Good morning. Today is the 17th Sunday in Ordinary Time. Sometimes you read the readings and you think, why is this the reading? I mean, Sodom and Gomorrah, fire and brimstone. I don't want to preach about that stuff. But as you know, we don't get to pick the readings. They are on a cycle, so here it goes. In the first reading today, the Lord says, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin is so grave that I must go down and see whether or not their actions fully correspond to the cry against them that comes up to me. I mean to find out." Now that sounds awfully serious. God is pretty upset with Sodom and Gomorrah. And so he and Abraham proceed to negotiate on how many innocent people it would take for God to spare the two cities from destruction. I mean, Abraham talks him all the way down to only needing 10 people to save the cities. And that's the end of the reading. It's kind of a strange reading with Abraham calming God down. I mean, God's upset. He's going to destroy all these people. Their sin is so grave. And of course, we all know what their sin is. We know what we've been told it is anyway. But I thought, this timely I really should look it up, Sodom and Gomorrah, to be sure. So I went on the USCCB website and I looked at the Bible they have on there. They have the New American Bible Revised Edition on the USCCB website. And so I looked up our reading today from Genesis 18 to find out exactly what it said the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was. Of course, if there's one thing that I know for sure, it's that Sodom and Gomorrah have been held up as the epitome of sinful places. Everybody's heard of Sodom and Gomorrah. Everybody knows that Sodom and Gomorrah are the worst cities in the Bible. Sodom and Gomorrah are cities that you don't want to emulate. You don't want your city to be compared to Sodom and Gomorrah, for sure. And on the USCCB website, there's a little asterisk next to the verse, right where it says that their sin is so grave. An asterisk for a footnote. And so I read the footnote. Then after reading the footnote, I went and got my Bible. The Bible was given to me by the bishop when we were in deacon formation because I wanted to make sure that I was getting this right. It turns out my Bible has the same footnote. Now the footnote says the immorality of the cities was already hinted at when Lot made his choice to live there. And the outcry that God heard that started this whole thing comes from the victims of the injustice and violence rampant in the city. Sodom and Gomorrah became types of sinful cities in biblical literature. Isaiah sees their sin as a lack of social justice. Ezekiel sees it as a disregard for the poor. And Jeremiah sees it as general immorality. And then the footnote says, in the Genesis story, the sin is violation of the sacred duty of hospitality by the threatened rape of Lot's guests. Now that's not how I remembered the story being taught at all. So I went to Genesis 19 to find out exactly what it said. Chapter 19 of Genesis tells about the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. The two angels come to Sodom, and Lot, who is Abraham's nephew, meets them at the city gate and invites them to stay at his house so they can wash their feet, rest, and eat. He prepares a banquet, whole spread. But that night, the townsmen of Sodom, all of them it says, come and demand that Lot send out his guests so that, quote, we may have sexual relations with them. Now that's how I remember the story being taught. This is the point where many an anti-LGBT homily will take off. They're probably having them all over the country right now. Same-sex attraction. It's right there. You see, same-sex attraction, that's the term that we in the church like to use. The LGBTQ community doesn't like that term, don't want us to use it. It reduces love to an act of carnal pleasure, which, if you think about it, it's kind of insulting to all of the rest of us that are in love too. But to be fair, single, celibate men who come up with these terms are not supposed to know anything about love or carnal pleasure. Now we're just going to skip over that for now, because that's a different homily on a different day. But our terminology for the LGBTQ community reminds me of a game that my brother and I used to play called Stupid Head. And see, the game was I'd call him a stupid head, and he didn't want me to, so then he would chase me and catch me and beat me up. It was fun to mess with him, I guess. Mom had a different name for this game. She called it name calling. Stop calling your brother names that he doesn't want you to call him. That's what she used to say. Now, I don't know why we're still name-calling as adults, I guess to mess with the LGBT community. And it works. They don't chase us down and beat us up, but they do run away from the church, abandon their faith sometimes. It's kind of a weird game for Christians to be playing. But this passage about Sodom and Gomorrah's sin is not talking about LGBTQ people at all. It's not talking about attraction. You see, but everybody knows that the sin of Sodom is sodomy. That's where they got the name. But that's not what it's talking about. And so I remembered the asterisks from the USCCB website. And so I looked up the references that it gave there about Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And the prophet Jeremiah, when he was comparing Jerusalem to Sodom, he said they were strengthening the power of the wicked so that no one turns from evil. To me, they are all like Sodom. And the prophet Ezekiel wrote, when describing Sodom, they were proud, well sated with food, complacent with prosperity. They did not give any help to the poor and needy. They became arrogant and committed abominations before me. Now I thought, I've got to go to this passage in Genesis because, boy, that hits close to home in this good economy, don't it? I mean, it's a good thing we're not proud and arrogant, or we'd hit the trifecta of sodomite adjectives. Now see, in Genesis, in chapter 19, the townsmen, they are threatening to rape the two visitors. Now this is more of a prison rape situation than a bathhouse orgy situation. Now we in the church, we want it to be a bathhouse so that we can condemn LGBTQ persons. But it's not talking about sexual relations between consenting adults. It's talking about rape. Now I haven't been to the penitentiary myself, but I know quite a few people who have, and I think that it would be a mistake to go into a prison rape type of situation believing that these fellas are attracted to you. You see, rape's not about that. It's a dominance thing, a form of control. It's assertion of superiority in the power dynamic. It's used to hurt, to harm, to humiliate, to abuse, to destroy the person's psyche. They're not trying to court you. They don't want to play house and order one of them wedding cakes we worry so much about. You see, in the story, the men of the town are trying to harm, abuse, hurt the strangers that Lot has welcomed into his home. They aren't in trouble, the people of Sodom. They're not in trouble for being gay. They're in trouble for being rapists. And then Lot, now in a move that we can't really understand, he offers up his 2 daughters for the townsmen to rape. And he said, I beg you, my brothers, do not do this wicked thing. I have 2 daughters. Let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you please. But do not do anything to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. You see, that is the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. The thing that had God all worked up and ready to kill them, their mistreatment of the strangers. They're violating the sacred duty to welcome the stranger. There are 36 laws in the Jewish Torah on welcoming the stranger and being hospitable. 36. That's more than any other type of law, including Sabbath. The most reiterated of God's laws was welcoming the stranger. It's so important to welcome the stranger that Lot is willing to sacrifice even his family to keep this law from being broken. He'd rather his own flesh and blood be mistreated than a stranger at his door, a stranger seeking shelter under his roof. Now that does not translate to our culture clearly. In our culture, we're not too concerned with protecting strangers seeking shelter. And the townsmen, now they're not willing to negotiate with Lot on this point at all. I mean, especially not someone like Lot. The townsmen say, this man came here as a resident alien, and now he dares to give orders. We will treat you worse than them. Now the angry rhetoric about Lot's immigration status is unsettlingly familiar. I seem to remember reading a tweet just the other day about how people should go back where they came from, fix up their own country, instead of trying to tell us what to do. So what do you think Jesus says about Sodom and Gomorrah? Now he only mentions it a few times. He compares the fire and brimstone from heaven that fell onto Sodom with what's going to happen at the end times. And in another instance, he tells the unbelieving people of Capernaum that if he had shown his power and taught his truth in Sodom, even those people would have been saved. And Jesus compares to Sodom and Gomorrah towns that do not welcome his missionary disciples when he sends them. You see, Jesus sends missionaries to places, and I think we should be careful about us deciding from whence he might send them, because he can send anyone from anywhere to anywhere else. It is our pride and our arrogance that assumes we have no need of a missionary. Welcoming and caring for the stranger is God's ancient commandment. Sodom and Gomorrah violated this commandment. That's their grave sin, and it's our sin too. Violation of the sacred duty of hospitality, the sacred duty of welcome. Hospitality and protection that we should offer even if it's at great personal risk, or, in the case of Lot, great risk to our family. It's a radical welcome to outsiders, and it's been on our books and supposed to be in our hearts for thousands of years. Sodom and Gomorrah got destroyed in part for not welcoming strangers. Of course, they were also proud, overflowing with food, complacent with prosperity, refusing to help the poor and needy. They were strengthening the power of the wicked so that no one turned from evil. They were directing angry rhetoric at those that questioned their actions, especially people like Lot, who weren't from there. And lest we forget, rape and violent crime were rampant there. They were sinful, sinful people. Grave sin, God says. So why is this the reading? Well, because us as a society, we're mighty violent. We're mighty rapey. Are we rapier than Sodom and Gomorrah? I don't know, but we're pretty daggone rapey. I mean, it's in our government at all levels. It's in our schools. It's in our churches. Heck, I know a girl that got raped last week. It's rampant. And it's a reading because Jeremiah and Ezekiel's description of Sodom and Gomorrah is spot on for our nation. We're doing all that stuff and more. But see, we suffer from American exceptionalism. We think, well, that doesn't really apply to us. God's not talking about our raping. God's not talking about our immigrants that we get over here. God's not talking about our pride and our arrogance. God is not talking about the wicked people that we give power to. But see, that's just it. We've become so complacent in our prosperity, so proud and arrogant. We have strengthened the power of the wicked so much that none of us can turn from this evil that we're involved in. Maybe Abraham will negotiate for our lives. Maybe he'll talk God down. I hope so. And I hope that we figure it out before the fire and the brimstone get here.